All right, psychology. So we are going to keep going with our study of development. And for this video, we're going to focus on you, on adolescent development. And then we will take a look at moral development as well. So we need to be sure that we are clear on when exactly adolescence happens. And most people in the field will say that adolescence happens somewhere between ages 10 and 20. And it's that period of transition between childhood and adulthood. And there's something that we can label as puberty to maybe independence. And very often in the period of adolescence, there are some physical changes that are taking place. There is some sexual maturity, and then ultimately the developmental period is going to end with social achievement and something that you are all looking forward to, some independence. There is a psychologist who named this period of time for you storm and stress, because there is so much turbulence happening, so many changes that are coming at you physically, emotionally, mentally. It's a lot to keep up with. And interestingly, you can see the comparison here between adolescence and what was deemed the adolescent period in the 1890s compared to 100 years ago. And there were a lot of different factors in terms of what maybe characterized this period. Some of it had to do with just the actual education that you were receiving, or were you able to financially support yourself? And so there's been a lot of changes in 100 years in terms of when this period actually starts. Females especially are maturing earlier, and it's maybe taking us in current day a little bit longer to reach that level of what we would call independent status or adulthood, and that's taking a little bit longer. So puberty, we can characterize this as the period of sexual maturation. During this time, an individual also becomes capable of reproducing. There's stuff going on inside, all right? And what's causing it is this massive surge of hormones for both men and women. And these hormones are going to cause some physical changes. They're going to cause some emotional changes. And typically for girls, we say that puberty is going to begin around age 11. And the term that is used to describe the beginning of puberty for women is what's called menarche. And this is when girls, on average, have their first menstrual cycle. Boys are a little bit slower. It's a little bit more delayed. And puberty typically begins for boys at around age 13. But this timetable has been shifting for a while, and puberty has been starting earlier, almost 3 to 4 months earlier, every single decade. And then you add all of that up, and we've seen a pretty big shift in the change of the onset of puberty. There are some people who say that it has something to do with the food that we're eating, that these foods now are genetically modified, that there's a lot of hormones that maybe certain animals are being fed, and that those have actually impacted the better nutrition has impacted our earlier onset of puberty. So we got to consider the brain when we talk about adolescent development. And it's possible you heard that your frontal lobe in your brain has something to do with your development. And the interesting thing about teens is that your frontal lobes are still not finished growing and developing, and you still have almost a whole decade left of growth and development in your frontal lobes. And your frontal lobes are responsible for some of that decision making that is ever so important. And there are many who say that that explains a lot about teens' behavior. The interesting pairing to this, though, is that another part of your brain that's known as the limbic system, and the limbic system is where your emotional responses are all created. And it is fired up and it is ready to go and it is fully developed. So you've got this emotional section piece of your brain that is, it's ready to go. And trust me, you combine the hormonal response with that. Your emotions and those emotional responses, they are on fire. It's lit up in that part of your brain. But it doesn't have an equal pairing of responsible decision making, that balance that you need. And so it's no surprise that during this time period, a lot of adolescents may understand that there are consequences for behaviors, but they might be more apt to give in to that thrill aspect or the rewards, or maybe act a little more spontaneously sometimes than is maybe always the best idea. So you can see another image here of the average teenage brain. And if you take a second, it's not too far off, right? You divide up all of the things, the components of your life there, and that wanting to belong, that sense of belonging, and really that translates into love in a lot of, other ways of looking at it, I suppose. So there's a term called adolescent egocentrism, and you've seen egocentrism before as we've looked at cognitive development, and this is a term that Piaget created. But there's also something like this that happens during adolescence, and it's the time period where teens believe that your experiences are unique and that your parents and other people have absolutely no idea what you're going through. That we are so out of touch. It's how you believe about a lot of us adults. That this egocentrism, I am the only one that is going through this. And it's interesting if you think about certain events or moments that have happened to you, and if you're walking to class and you suddenly trip on the sidewalk and your initial response is, oh my gosh, I have to go home. Everybody saw that. I am so embarrassed. Everyone is talking about me and how I tripped on the sidewalk. Well, guess what? They're not, but it's that adolescent egocentrism that kind of takes over and sort of gets your underdeveloped frontal lobe thinking that that's what's going on. Social media kind of works in that same way, that if you don't put something out there on social media, that nobody's going to know you're alive. Or on the flip side, you put something out there on social media and you want to be sure people see it. You are waiting for those comments and those likes. And that's a form of adolescent egocentrism. And Jean Piaget would identify the adolescent stage as what he calls the formal operational stage. And your reasoning in this stage is that you think about how reality compares to ideals. You want something, this is what you believe in, but what is the reality? You think hypothetically about different choices and their consequences, right? You're beginning to think a little bit deeper. You're able to go a little further in your thinking. You're starting to have goals and look towards your future. And then you think about other people. And very prominent in this thought process is, what do they think of me? A very admirable trait of adolescence. And from my perspective, this is one of the reasons why I love teaching high school, is because you're kind of like, you're little adults and you have opinions and you have ideas and you get very passionate about causes, and you see justice and fairness in terms of merit and equity instead of just everyone gets equal treatment. Okay, you think that there should be a level of earned value to things, and you will advocate for others to be sure that they get that equal treatment. And right now, especially in this country, I'm pretty sure that many of you have some very strong ideas about equity and justice. And you think about the meaning, spiritual meanings in your life. And you're looking inward and looking at the world in a much deeper perspective than you have in earlier stages of your life. Erik Erikson says that this is that stage of, identity, and you're trying to form that identity and you're trying to figure out who you are. And I apologize for the scrambled letters on this graphic here. But, maybe you have found that some of your friends from an earlier stage in life, they don't really fit who you are anymore. Because again, you're beginning to test the waters and figure out who you should be and who the real you really is. And one of the greatest things that is about to happen to many of you is you're going to move beyond high school and you'll step foot in college, where you're kind of free from those social chains that bound you so strongly in high school. And you'll find so many other people who are a lot like you, and you don't have this sort of social facade, this social mask that you have to carry around with you. And you'll be kind of free to be who you want to be. And that's something really exciting to look forward to. So with adolescent development, you have to consider your social identity. And it's what we would call the we aspect of your social concept. And it's the part of the answer to the question of who am I that you obtain from group memberships. And having relationships with other people helps you form your identity. And if you consider some of the social groups, I'm trying to avoid, I don't want to use the word clique, but you know what those cliques are. You know what those groups are on campus. And they very much have an influence on our identity. And people will automatically place labels on certain groups of people because that's what you do at this stage in life. So we're going to move on to the next piece of this lecture, and we're going to talk about moral development. And moral development is really your growth in the ability to tell right from wrong, control your impulses, act ethically. And again, some of this is going to happen with age, but not necessarily, because it's very possible that some people in their lifetime struggle with moral development, and they may never get out of one of those very first stages. And we call the basic understanding of right and wrong, this is what we call our morality. Okay, and very often this is value-based and something that maybe is instilled in us as we grow up. So the person that we're going to focus most on as we talk about moral development is Lawrence Kohlberg. And he really sought to describe the development of moral reasoning. And he determined that there are 3 levels of moral development, that these are the processes that we use to determine right from wrong. So in his first level of moral development, this is what he calls pre-conventional morality. And to make it easy on you, if you can consider the pre-conventional stage of cognitive development, okay, Piaget's stage. And this happens before age 9. And this is typically what Kohlberg would say, or when this would happen for Kohlberg as well. And for the most part, children tend to do the right thing because they are trying to avoid punishment. And something very important with Kohlberg's development is it's the thing you want to focus on is not what you choose to do. It's why you choose to do it. Okay, it's that thought process. So children at this stage, they make a decision to do the right thing because they're trying to avoid punishment, or they're trying to further their self-interest. Okay, they want to be seen as a good boy or a good girl, and they see rules as fixed or absolute. I mean, how often can you remember as a little kid, or maybe you babysit or have much younger siblings in your house, or you've been around them, and the tattletale, oh, they just like to tell on each other, and sometimes to no end. But it's because they are in this stage of pre-conventional morality, where these rules are in place and they better be followed. Okay, they are absolute. And you're going to tell on someone because you want to make sure that you aren't going to get in trouble. So level 2 is what we call conventional morality. And by early adolescence, if you think to Piaget, this stage is called concrete operational. So the two sound similar. Okay, conventional morality, people follow the rules because they're trying to live up to the expectations of others. And there's also an awareness of law and order. And you've got to do your duty. Okay, I'm a citizen in this world. I am a student in this classroom. I'm a member of a team. Okay, I've got to follow the rules because, you know, there's other people depending on me. And typically most teenagers and most adults, this is where most people make those decisions. Okay, this is the conventional morality stage. The third level for Kohlberg is what he calls post-conventional. Okay, post-conventional, and this is the highest level of morality. And if you think in terms of your thinking process, this would correlate with the formal operational stage of Piaget. And we have to consider sort of this social contract that we have. We live in this world, that it promotes society's welfare. Okay, we are trying to uphold a certain level of civility in this world, and we have to promote justice. And there can sometimes be conflicts, though, between what is socially acceptable and what an individual actually believes. And that's why sometimes post-conventional morality is often hard to give into. You know, people know what is really the right and ethical thing to do, but sometimes their individual beliefs get in the way of them making a post-conventional moral decision. So there were some criticisms of Kohlberg, and one of those criticism is that he was concerned with moral thinking, but there's a big difference between knowing what to do versus what we actually do. And so for Kohlberg, it was more of a thinking process. Okay, what we think we should do. It wasn't focused on the action of what people really do. I mean, I'm an adult and I'm not perfect by any means. And I know what my actions, the results of my actions can be. And sometimes I know that I could make a better choice. but maybe my actions don't necessarily always follow those moral choices. The other criticism is that this was a very Western-centric research experiment, and he used primarily male subjects. They were, many of them, white, upper-class young men, and it was just gave a different perspective on moral reasoning. You know, the environment that you're brought up in is definitely going to have an impact on how you make decisions in your life. It has a huge impact on that. And so those were some of the criticisms for Kohlberg. So the answer, so to speak, for Kohlberg was given by Carol Gilligan. And she proposed the stages of ethics of care. And her focus then was a little more on the female response. And her research with females showed that women are capable of moral reasoning, but they very often give much more emotional responses, or it comes from more of a place of empathy. And what she called that was the caring principles. And that traditionally, throughout time, females are traditionally taught a moral perspective that focuses on community and caring about personal relationship. And if you think historically about the role of women in society, the types of jobs that women had, nurses, teachers, those are typically jobs that would require that caring principle, and the decisions and the relationships that women have in those roles definitely lead them to make different choices. So there you go. That's your next little lesson in development.